The security badge scanner beeped its familiar tone as Brenda Hughes pressed her ID against the reader. But her hand trembled so violently that she had to steady her wrist with her other palm. Behind her, reflected in the glass door's surface, stood Derek Martinez, the man who had been leaving roses on her car windshield for 3 years, who had sent her hundreds of messages from blocked numbers, who somehow knew every restaurant she visited. He was holding the door open, smiling that same patient smile, waiting for her to enter first. Good day, everyone. I am grateful you are here with me. Before we begin, I would really love to know where you are watching from. Comment your city below. Now, let me tell you about something that changed my life forever. Brenda stepped through the doorway, her 63-year-old knees nearly buckling beneath her navy blazer and pencil skirt. The fluorescent lights of Meridian Tech's lobby buzzed overhead as she walked faster toward the elevator bank, her heels clicking against the polished marble with increasing urgency. She could hear his footsteps matching her pace, not rushing, never rushing. That was his way. He moved through the world like he had all the time in it, like her fear was a clock he could wind at his leisure. The elevator doors began sliding shut when his hand shot between them. The rubber sensors triggered, and the doors jerked open again. Derek stepped inside, positioning himself in the corner diagonal to her, giving her space the way a cat gives a mouse room to run. His messenger bag hung from his shoulder, the IT department logo stitched on the front pocket. She stared at the ascending floor numbers, watching them illuminate one by one. 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor. Morning, Ms. Hughes. Her throat constricted. She managed a curt nod, nothing more. The air in the elevator felt thick, pressing against her chest like a weight. When she reached the 7th floor, Brenda practically lunged through the opening doors. Her department sprawled before her. Rows of cubicles housing the accounting team she'd managed for 12 years. She moved between the fabric-covered dividers, acknowledging greetings with tight smiles and half waves, until she reached her corner office. The door clicked shut behind her. She twisted the lock. Brenda pressed her back against the wood, sliding down until she sat on the industrial carpet, her knees pulled to her chest. Her breath came in short gasps. The morning sun streamed through her window, illuminating the framed certificates on her walls, the photos of her grandchildren on her desk, the potted orchid her sister had given her last Christmas. Everything looked normal. Everything was a lie. She pulled her phone from her purse with shaking fingers and opened her email. The message had arrived at 5:43 that morning. You looked beautiful sleeping last night. That blue nightgown is my favorite. No sender name, just like all the others. Brenda pushed herself up from the floor and moved to her desk, waking her computer. She pulled up the company directory and typed Derek's name, even though she'd done this 100 times before. His photo stared back at her. Network security specialist, hired 14 months ago. She scrolled through his credentials. MIT graduate, 8 years at a Silicon Valley startup, glowing recommendations. Perfect on paper. The police had found nothing actionable. HR had found him professional and courteous. A knock rattled her door. Brenda flinched so hard her knee slammed into the underside of her desk. Brenda? It's Valerie. You okay in there? Brenda stood, smoothing her blazer, running her palms over her hair. She unlocked the door and opened it to find her colleague standing there with 2 coffee cups, concern etched across her face. You look pale, Valerie said, handing her one of the cups. Didn't sleep well. Brenda accepted the coffee, wrapping both hands around its warmth. Valerie lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more, but Brenda's phone buzzed. Another message, another blocked number, another piece of her life that Derek had somehow witnessed. That coffee Valerie brought you. Try the hazelnut creamer in the break room instead. It's better. The phone slipped from Brenda's grip, clattering against the hardwood floor. Coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup, burning her thumb. She barely registered the pain. Her eyes shot to the window, closed, blinds drawn just as she'd left them. Then to the smoke detector in the corner, its tiny red light blinking steadily. She'd checked it last week with a screwdriver, finding nothing but circuitry and batteries. Valerie bent down to retrieve the phone, but Brenda's foot came down first, sliding it away across the floor. "I've got it." The words came out sharp, breathless. Valerie straightened slowly, her expression shifting from concern to something more guarded. She took a step backward into the hallway, clutching her own coffee cup against her chest like a shield. Brenda watched her colleague's shoulders tense, watched the small retreat, and felt the familiar shame crawl up her spine. This was how people looked at you when you started coming undone. When fear made you erratic, unpredictable. Brenda scooped up the phone and shoved it into her blazer pocket. Her hand trembled as she set the coffee cup on her desk, missing the coaster entirely. Dark liquid pooled across scattered papers. Budget reports she'd been reviewing before dawn broke her already fractured sleep. "I need to make a call," Brenda said, already reaching for the door. Valerie nodded, backing farther into the hallway. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed. She turned and walked away, her footsteps quick and purposeful against the tile. Brenda shut the door and threw the deadbolt. She yanked her phone from her pocket and pulled up the company's internal security footage app. The one she'd gained access to 3 weeks ago by claiming she needed to monitor server room entry for an audit. Her fingers flew across the screen, scrolling backward through this morning's timestamps. 5:52 a.m., empty hallway outside her apartment. 5:49, empty. 5:45, empty. She kept scrolling, her breath coming faster. There, 5:43, the exact timestamp of the email. A figure moved through the hallway of her apartment building, caught by the camera mounted above the elevator bank. Baseball cap pulled low, a dark hoodie, hands shoved into pockets. The person paused directly in front of her door. Unit 7C, stood there for nearly 30 seconds, then reached out and touched the doorframe, fingers trailing along the wood before disappearing down the stairwell. Brenda zoomed in, her face inches from the screen. The image pixelated, became a blur of shadows and compressed video artifacts. She couldn't make out facial features, couldn't identify build or height with any certainty. But she knew. Every cell in her body recognized the predatory stillness of that posture. She switched to the company's internal cameras, pulling up footage from the 3rd floor where Derek's cubicle sat in the IT department. She typed in 5:43 a.m. and waited for the video to load. Empty. His desk chair sat vacant, monitor dark. She scrolled forward. 5:50, 6 o'clock, 6:15. At 6:23, Derek appeared on camera, walking casually down the corridor with a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He settled into his chair, powered up his computer, and began typing as if he'd been nowhere else all morning. Brenda slammed the phone face down on her desk. The screen protector cracked with a sound like ice breaking. She pressed her palms flat against the desktop, trying to control the shaking that had spread from her hands up through her arms. Her reflection stared back from the darkened computer monitor. Eyes too wide, makeup unable to hide the gray exhaustion beneath. The hazelnut creamer. He'd mentioned hazelnut creamer. She crossed to her door, listened for footsteps in the hallway, then unlocked it and stepped out. The break room sat 20 feet away, its door propped open with a rubber wedge. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one of them flickering in an irregular pattern that made her vision swim. She moved quickly, her heels clicking against tile, and pushed into the break room. The refrigerator compressor rattled as she yanked open the door. 3 creamer bottles lined the shelf. French vanilla, plain cream, and there in the back, a new bottle of hazelnut. The plastic seal intact. Price sticker still attached. Brenda pulled it out, turning it over in her hands. Purchased from the grocery store 2 blocks from her apartment. The same store where she bought her own groceries every Thursday evening. She set the bottle on the counter and backed away from it as if it might detonate. Her hip collided with a chair, sending it scraping across the linoleum. The sound echoed in the empty room, and she froze, listening. Water gurgled through pipes in the walls. The refrigerator compressor cycled off, leaving sudden silence. Someone had brought that creamer here. Someone who knew she'd see it, who knew Valerie would bring her coffee, who'd planned this specific moment of realization. The message wasn't just about surveillance anymore. It was about control. About demonstrating the reach of his knowledge, the impossibility of her privacy. Brenda's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't need to look at it. She could feel the weight of his attention through the device, could sense him watching somewhere, waiting for her reaction. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms hard enough to leave crescents in the skin. Brenda grabbed the creamer bottle and threw it into the trash bin with enough force to make the metal container ring out. The sound reverberated through the break room, sharp and final. She turned on her heel and strode back into the corridor, her breath coming faster now, pulse hammering at her temples. The lobby spread before her, 37 employees visible from where she stood. Brenda positioned herself near the reception desk, arms crossed, and began a methodical scan of every face. Marketing clustered near the elevator banks. Finance huddled by the water cooler. IT specialists moved between cubicles with laptops tucked under their arms. She studied each person's movements, searching for the wrong gesture, the lingering glance, the person who watched too long. Martin from accounting passed by, nodding without making eye contact. Too timid, she'd decided weeks ago. His hands trembled when he delivered reports. Stacy from HR breezed past with her phone pressed to her ear, already deep in conversation before reaching her office. Brenda tracked her until she disappeared around the corner, then shifted her attention to the cluster of new hires gathered near the conference room. A year. He'd been here a full year, according to the pattern she'd mapped. The deliveries to her desk had started 12 months ago, small things at first. A coffee cup left beside her keyboard, still warm. Post-it notes with motivational quotes that matched ones taped to her bathroom mirror at home. A folder she'd been searching for, appearing exactly where she'd already looked 3 times. The incidents had multiplied gradually, each one more personal, each one revealing another sliver of her private life. Brenda moved toward the IT department, her shoes silent now on the carpeted section of the floor. Server racks hummed behind glass walls. Computer screens cast blue light across concentrated faces. Derek sat at his desk, fingers flying across his keyboard, headphones blocking out the world. She'd considered him seriously last month. It had access to everything: security systems, badge logs, email accounts. But Derek left at exactly 5:15 every day, his life governed by a rigid schedule that included picking up his daughter from daycare. The stalking required flexibility, odd hours, the ability to appear and disappear without accountability. She continued past the cubicles, noting body language and behavior. Raymond leaned back in his chair, laughing at something on his monitor. Too comfortable, too open. Perpetrators of this kind of surveillance developed nervous habits, excessive checking of phones, hyper-awareness of their surroundings. the constant need to monitor their target's location and reactions. The stairwell door opened on her right. Brenda's head snapped toward the movement. A maintenance worker emerged, pushing a cleaning cart, supplies rattling with each bump over the threshold. She didn't recognize him. Her stomach clenched. She stepped forward, positioning herself to get a better look at his face, but he'd already turned down the adjacent hallway, the cartwheels squeaking against the floor. Brenda pulled out her phone and opened the security app she'd installed 3 weeks ago. The cameras she could access showed standard activity. People moving through corridors, gathering in conference rooms, sitting at desks. Nothing unusual. Nothing that screamed predator. She closed the app and opened her photo gallery instead, scrolling to the documentation she'd been compiling. Pictures of items left on her desk. Screenshots of emails that arrived minutes after she'd mentioned something in her apartment. A photograph of her car's front tire, deflated in the parking garage the same day she'd told her sister over the phone that she needed new tires. The evidence created a timeline, but not an identity. Whoever orchestrated this possessed patience and intelligence. They understood systems, knew how to move through the building unnoticed, had studied her habits thoroughly enough to predict her responses. Footsteps approached from behind. Brenda shoved her phone into her pocket and turned. James from legal strode toward her, briefcase swinging at his side. "Brenda, you have a minute? Need your signature on the Thompson contract." She nodded, following him back toward her office. Her hands stayed loose at her sides, but her shoulder blades tensed, the space between them crawling with awareness. Someone was watching right now. She could feel it like humidity before rain, oppressive and inescapable. James spread the contract across her desk. Brenda scanned the pages without really seeing them, her peripheral vision tracking movement in the hallway beyond her open door. People passed in both directions. Any one of them could be him. The man who knew she kept emergency chocolate in her desk drawer. Who knew she took anxiety medication at night? Who knew the pattern of her breathing when she slept, because he'd somehow, impossibly, heard it? She signed the document with controlled strokes, her signature steady despite the tremor in her forearms. "Thanks." James gathered the papers and departed. Alone again, Brenda moved to her door and closed it slowly, watching the hallway until the last possible second before the latch clicked. She turned the lock and tested the handle. Secure. The window blinds were already drawn. She'd started keeping them closed constantly 2 months ago, after finding a coffee cup on her windowsill, placed from the outside, 14 floors up. Brenda pressed her back against the door, feeling the solid wood through her blazer. Her breath came shallow and quick. The office walls seemed closer now, the fluorescent lights harsh against her closed eyelids. She forced them open and moved to her desk, pulling out the bottom drawer where she kept the documented evidence. 3 manila folders. The first contained printed emails, 47 messages over 6 months that referenced conversations she'd never had with anyone. Details about her mother's funeral, her nephew's college acceptance, the recurring dream about drowning that she'd mentioned only to her therapist. The second folder held photographs taken from angles that shouldn't exist. Her living room shot through a window she kept curtained. Her car in the underground garage, passenger door standing open though she remembered locking it. The third folder remained empty, waiting for whatever came next. Her desk phone rang. The sound pierced through her like voltage. She stared at the blinking line, internal extension. Her hand hovered over the receiver, then snatched it up. "Hughes. Conference room 3. 5 minutes. The voice belonged to Richard, her department head. The line went dead. Brenda replaced the receiver with exaggerated care. She gathered the folders and locked them in her desk, then straightened her jacket and smoothed her hair in the reflection of her dark computer monitor. Her face looked gaunt, the hollows beneath her cheekbones deeper than a month ago. She'd stopped eating lunch at her desk after finding a fork moved from one side of her drawer to the other while she'd been in a morning meeting. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. Her heels clicked against polished tile as she walked, each step measured and deliberate. Conference room 3 sat at the building's corner, glass walls offering views into 2 corridors. She preferred these transparent spaces now. Nowhere for anyone to hide. Richard stood beside the table, his arms crossed over his barrel chest. 2 other figures occupied chairs at the far end. Brenda's stride faltered. She recognized Vincent from IT immediately, his lanky frame folded into the chair, fingers drumming against the table surface. The woman beside him was new. Dark hair pulled back, notepad open, pen already moving across the page. "Brenda, sit." Richard gestured to the chair nearest the door. She remained standing, positioning herself where she could see all 3 of them and both hallway approaches simultaneously. "What's this about?" Vincent's fingers stopped their drumming. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Your computer's been compromised. Someone's been accessing your files remotely for months." The air left Brenda's lungs. She gripped the back of the chair, knuckles whitening against the leather. "How long have you known?" "Found the breach 2 days ago during routine maintenance." Vincent pulled a tablet from his bag and slid it across the table. "Wanted to be sure before saying anything." Brenda picked up the tablet. Lines of code filled the screen, meaningless to her. But Vincent's annotations made the violation clear. Logan times corresponding to when she'd been away from her desk. File access logs showing documents opened, read, closed. Her personnel file. Her medical records from the company insurance portal. Her salary history. Her home address. "Who?" The word came out rough, scraping past the tightness in her throat. Vincent shook his head. That's where it gets complicated. The access came from inside the building, but the user credentials were masked. Whoever did this knows their way around our security protocols. The woman with the notepad finally looked up. "I'm Diana from Corporate Security. We're treating this as a priority investigation." She clicked her pen twice, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Mr. Chen tells us you've had concerns about suspicious activity. We need you to walk us through everything." Brenda set the tablet down and pulled out the chair, lowering herself into it with rigid control. Her hands rested flat on the table, fingers splayed to stop their shaking. "It started 13 months ago. Small things at first. Items moved on my desk. Coffee in the break room prepared exactly how I take it, sitting there like someone knew I was coming." Richard moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did. Filed 3 separate complaints with HR. They told me I was stressed, suggested I take personal time." Brenda's voice hardened. "Said there was no evidence of anything beyond coincidence?" Diana's pen moved faster now, filling the page with tight script. "What changed?" "The messages started. Notes left in my desk. Someone quoting things I'd said in my apartment, alone." Brenda paused, watching Vincent's face drain of color. "Last week I came home and found my photo albums rearranged. Every picture of me was turned to face the same direction, like someone had studied each one." Vincent pushed back from the table, chair wheels scraping against tile. He paced to the glass wall, staring out into the corridor beyond. "Jesus, Brenda, this is someone internal. Has to be." Brenda's knuckles went white against the table edge as Diana's pen stopped mid-stroke. The security specialist's eyes locked onto something over Brenda's shoulder. her expression shifting from professional concern to sharp alertness. Richard straightened from the window, his hand moving toward his hip in a practiced motion that suggested more than corporate security training. The corridor outside the conference room had emptied minutes ago, the usual post-lunch traffic thinning to nothing. Now a figure stood motionless beyond the glass wall, partially obscured by the frosted section, but clearly watching. Brenda felt her stomach drop as she recognized the navy blue sweater, the particular tilt of the head. She'd seen that exact stance outside her favorite coffee shop, in the parking garage, outside her building at dawn when she'd left for an early morning walk. Vincent noticed their collective freeze and turned, following their sight lines. His breath caught audibly. "That's Jasper Thornton from data analysis. He transferred in from the Portland office about 14 months ago." The timeline hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled, the room's fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. She gripped the chair arms, forcing herself to remain seated when every instinct screamed to run or confront. Jasper made no attempt to hide his presence. He lifted one hand in a slow wave, fingers spreading deliberately. The gesture was intimate, familiar, as if they shared some private understanding. Diana was already moving, her phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. Richard positioned himself between the glass wall and Brenda, blocking the line of sight. His body language radiated controlled aggression, shoulders squared, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "Don't look at him," Richard's voice came out steady but commanding. "Vincent, kill the glass transparency, now." Vincent lunged for the wall panel, fingers stabbing at buttons. The smart glass began to cloud, opacity spreading in waves. But before it completely obscured the view, Jasper pressed something against the transparent surface. A photograph. Brenda's breath stopped entirely. The image showed her asleep on her own couch, taken from inside her apartment. The angle suggested he'd been standing right beside her, close enough to touch. The glass went fully opaque. Brenda's hands were shaking so violently she had to shove them under her thighs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat painful. She'd felt safe in the office, surrounded by colleagues and security systems. The realization that he'd been here all along, sharing elevators and break rooms, possibly attending the same meetings, made her skin crawl with retroactive violation. Diana finished her call and moved to the door, checking the lock before turning back to them. "Building security is mobilizing. They're pulling footage from every camera on this floor for the last hour. Nobody leaves this room until we have him contained." "He's been accessing her personnel file," Vincent said suddenly, his face pale. He'd pulled out his tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm seeing irregular access patterns. Someone with his credentials opened your home address, emergency contacts, even your medical information. Multiple times over the past year." Brenda's throat tightened. The stalking hadn't been confined to physical proximity. He'd been mining her data, learning everything the company database could tell him. She thought about all the forms she'd filled out, the detailed questionnaires HR required. He'd had a roadmap to her entire life. A sharp knock made everyone jump. Diana moved to the door, peering through the small window before cracking it open. A uniformed security officer leaned in, speaking too quietly for Brenda to hear. Diana's jaw clenched as she listened, then she turned back to the room. "He's gone. Walked out the main entrance 3 minutes ago." "Cameras show him moving calmly, no rush, like he was leaving for lunch." Richard's fist slammed into the table, making the water bottles jump. "How the hell did he just walk out? You should have had people on every exit." "We did." Diana's voice was ice. "He went through the loading dock. Used an access card that shouldn't work for that door. We're pulling records now to see who authorized the override." Brenda stood abruptly, the chair rolling back to hit the wall. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself upright, spine straight. She'd spent the past year doubting herself, wondering if she was paranoid or overstressed. Now the validation felt almost worse than the gaslighting. He was real. He'd been close enough to photograph her sleeping. He'd touched her things, learned her routines, inserted himself into her workplace. "I need his personnel photo," she heard herself saying. "Everything in his file. I want to know where he lives, where he worked before, who his references were." Diana nodded, already typing on her phone. "I'm also calling the police. This moves beyond corporate security. He's committed multiple felonies." Vincent pulled up Jasper's file on the wall screen. The face that appeared was unremarkable. Brown hair, thin-framed glasses, pleasant smile. The kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Brenda stared at it, forcing herself to memorize every detail. Under employment history, Portland office showed a 16-month tenure. Before that, a gap of 2 years. Before that, another city, another company. "Call those references," Brenda said, her voice steadier now. "I want to know if anyone else reported problems. This feels practiced, like he's done this before." The conference room door swung open before Diana could respond. Brenda's pulse spiked, her body jerking backward into the table edge. But it was Marcus Trent, the company's legal counsel, his tie loosened and briefcase clutched against his chest like armor. He moved with the hurried efficiency of someone pulled from home at an ungodly hour. "Police are 10 minutes out," he said, setting the briefcase on the table with a decisive thump. Papers spilled across the glossy surface. "I've drafted a restraining order petition. Judge Emerson owes me a favor. We can have this filed by noon tomorrow." Brenda watched him arrange documents with practiced precision, his manicured fingers organizing evidence she'd been living with for months. The photographs Diana had pulled from Jasper's locker were spread across the table now, a timeline of violation. Her at the grocery store, her at the dentist, her watering the roses in her front yard, wearing the faded Northwestern sweatshirt she'd owned for 40 years. Her stomach clenched. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling the coffee she'd drunk hours ago threatening to resurface. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a frequency that made her temples throb. "Ms. Hughes, I need you to document everything." Marcus slid a yellow legal pad toward her, a pen placed precisely perpendicular to its edge. "Any interaction with Jasper Montgomery over the past 16 months. Any conversation, email, moment where he was present, dates if you remember them, approximations if you don't." The name felt like gravel in her ears. Jasper Montgomery. She'd worked alongside him for a year and never known his last name, never bothered to learn it. He'd been wallpaper, background noise, one of dozens of faces in the IT department she supervised from a distance. Brenda lifted the pen. Her hand trembled, making the tip waver above the blank yellow page. She set it down, pressed both palms flat against the cool table surface, breathed through her nose until the shaking subsided. When she picked up the pen again, her grip was white-knuckled, but steady. July, last year. New employee orientation. She wrote in careful block letters, each word deliberate. He volunteered to help with my laptop setup after I mentioned my computer was slow. Came to my office 3 times that week. The memory crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. She'd thought him helpful, eager to please. He'd lingered by her desk, asking about her career trajectory, her years at the company, whether she lived nearby. Personal questions she'd deflected with polite vagueness. Nothing that should have encouraged this obsession. Vincent's phone rang, the trill cutting through the room's tense silence. He answered, listened, his expression darkening. When he ended the call, he stood and moved to the wall screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard mounted below it. Portland PD just sent this over. They ran Montgomery's background. Vincent pulled up a document, text dense and official. 2 prior restraining orders. Seattle, 4 years ago. Denver, 6 years before that. Both women, both co-workers. Both situations escalated until legal intervention. The room tilted. Brenda gripped the table edge, her knuckles aching with the force of it. He'd done this before, refined it, learned from past mistakes how to get closer, stay hidden longer. She'd been a target the moment he'd seen her name on the company roster. Diana crossed to her, placed a hand on Brenda's shoulder. The touch was meant to comfort, but Brenda felt it like a brand, unwanted attention when every nerve was already screaming. She pulled away, not unkindly, but with enough force to establish distance. "I need to call my son," Brenda said. Her voice sounded hollow, echoing inside her own skull. "Not yet." Marcus's tone was firm, brooking no argument. "Once police arrive, they'll want your statement fresh. No discussions with anyone that might cloud your recollection." The legal pad filled slowly. August. Saw him in the parking garage 4 times in 1 week, always near my car. September. Noticed he started taking lunch at the same time I did. October. Found him on my floor after hours, said he was fixing a network issue. Her jaw ached. She'd been clenching it without realizing, teeth grinding against each other with enough pressure to send pain radiating through her sinuses. She worked her mouth open, rolled her neck, felt vertebrae crack with audible pops. The wall clock read 3:47 a.m. Outside the conference room windows, Portland sprawled in darkness punctured by streetlights and the occasional passing car. The building around them was silent except for the HVAC system's constant whisper and the fluorescent light's persistent hum. Somewhere in this same building, Jasper Montgomery had walked the hallways, ridden the elevators, breathed the same recirculated air. He'd studied her schedule, learned her patterns, inserted himself into the invisible margins of her daily existence. Brenda's phone buzzed against the table. A text from her son. "Mom, you okay? It's late." She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How did she answer that? How did she compress this nightmare into a text message that wouldn't send him into a panic? "Fine. Working late? Talk tomorrow." The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. She powered the phone down completely, unable to bear the weight of more questions she couldn't yet answer. The detective returned at 4:23 a.m. carrying 2 styrofoam cups that steamed in the cold conference room air. She set one in front of Brenda without ceremony, the coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The bitter smell of overbrewed French roast filled the space between them. Brenda wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her palms, up through her wrists. Her fingers had gone numb somewhere in the last hour, circulation sluggish from stress and exhaustion. The warmth brought pins and needles, tiny electric shocks dancing under her skin. Detective Chen dropped a manila folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud that made Brenda's shoulders jerk involuntarily. The folder was thick, swollen with papers that pressed against the edges. Photographs spilled out when Chen flipped it open, glossy 8x10s that scattered across the polished wood surface. Brenda's stomach lurched. Her own face stared back at her from a dozen angles. Walking to her car in the parking garage, the overhead fluorescents casting harsh shadows across her features. Entering her apartment building, caught mid-stride with her keys in hand. Sitting in the coffee shop on 3rd Street, the one she visited every Saturday morning, visible through the front window with a newspaper spread before her. The coffee cup slipped from her grip. She caught it before it tipped, but liquid splashed across her knuckles, hot enough to sting. She didn't wipe it away. The pain felt distant, happening to someone else's hand. "We executed a search warrant on his workspace and locker," Chen said. Her voice was flat, professional, scrubbed clean of emotion. These were in a locked drawer in his desk. More photographs. Brenda at the grocery store, reaching for produce with her reading glasses perched on her nose. Brenda at the gym, emerging from the women's locker room with her hair still damp from the shower. Brenda at her granddaughter's soccer game last month, caught in profile as she cheered from the bleachers, her throat constricted. Acid burned at the base of her esophagus, climbing higher with each swallow she couldn't quite complete. The coffee in her stomach churned, threatening to come back up. She pressed one hand against her abdomen, feeling the muscles spasm beneath her palm. "How long?" The words scraped out, raw and barely audible. Chen pulled out a calendar printout, dates highlighted in yellow marker. "We're still establishing a complete timeline, but based on metadata from the digital files, at least 18 months, maybe longer." 18 months! A year and a half of being watched, documented, studied like a specimen under glass. Brenda's vision narrowed, the edges going dark and fuzzy. She gripped the table edge, wood pressing into the soft flesh of her palms, hard enough to leave crescents. The detective shuffled more papers, revealing printed screenshots of social media accounts. Brenda's Facebook profile filled one page, every post she'd made in the last 2 years, captured and archived. Her LinkedIn page. Her company bio from the corporate website. A genealogy forum where she'd posted questions about her grandmother's family tree 3 years ago. He created multiple fake profiles to monitor your online presence, Chen continued. She tapped one screenshot showing a profile picture of a middle-aged white woman with gray hair and a pleasant smile. "This one befriended your daughter-in-law last year. They had 17 message exchanges." The room tilted. Brenda planted both feet flat on the floor, pressed down hard, tried to anchor herself to something solid. Her daughter-in-law, sweet, trusting Nicole who overshared everything online, who posted pictures of family dinners and birthday parties and weekend trips, who had unwittingly fed this monster information about Brenda's private life, her family, her grandchildren. Her hands started shaking again, worse than before. The tremors ran up her arms, into her shoulders, made her teeth chatter despite the stale warmth of the conference room. She clamped her jaw shut, bit down until her molars ground together with enough force to make her ears ring. Chen produced another document, this one a printed spreadsheet with columns of dates and times. "We also found logs of your movements. He tracked when you arrived at work, when you left, what floor you were on throughout the day. He accessed the building's security badge system remotely." The spreadsheet was color-coded. Was red for arrivals, blue for departures, green for floor changes recorded by elevator access. Months of data arranged in neat rows, her entire professional life reduced to timestamps and location markers. Brenda's eyes skipped down the columns, seeing patterns she'd never noticed. The Tuesdays when she always stayed late for budget meetings. The Fridays when she left early to babysit her grandson. The random Wednesday last month when she'd gone home at lunch because of a migraine. He knew everything. Every habit, every routine, every deviation from her normal schedule. He'd mapped her existence with the precision of a military operation, collecting intelligence, identifying vulnerabilities, waiting for his moment. "The IT forensics team is still analyzing his work computer," Chen said. She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a desk covered in post-it notes and printed documents. "But they've already found extensive searches on you. Property records, vehicle registration, credit history. He tried to access your personnel file 17 times through the HR database." Brenda's breath came in short, shallow gasps that never quite filled her lungs. The air felt thick, resistant, like breathing through wet cotton. She focused on the in-out rhythm, counting seconds, trying to slow her racing heart before it burst through her ribcage. The detective kept talking, pulling out more evidence, but the words became noise. Brenda stared at the photographs spread across the table, at all these stolen moments of her life now preserved as exhibits. She saw herself frozen in time, unaware and exposed, going about her daily routines while predatory eyes watched and recorded and planned. The door to the conference room burst open, and Brenda's hand flew to her chest as her body jerked backward. Her chair scraped against the floor with a harsh metallic screech that made her teeth clench. A uniformed officer leaned through the doorway, his face flushed and breathing hard like he'd sprinted up 3 flights of stairs. "Detective Chen, he's here. Parking garage, level B2. Security just spotted him on camera." Chen was already moving, her hand reaching for the radio clipped to her belt. She barked commands into it while striding toward the door, her other hand gesturing at Brenda to stay put. But Brenda's body had already begun to rise, propelled by something primal and electric that overrode rational thought. "Ms. Hughes, you need to remain—" Brenda was through the door before Chen finished the sentence, her sensible work shoes pounding against the industrial carpet. She'd spent 30 years in this building, knew every hallway, every shortcut, every emergency exit. Her legs carried her toward the stairwell that led directly to B2, the one near the south elevator bank that most employees didn't even know existed. Behind her, Chen shouted something, but the words dissolved into the thundering rush of blood in Brenda's ears. Her hip protested as she shouldered through the stairwell door, the old injury from a car accident 2 decades ago flaring hot and angry. She gripped the metal railing and began descending, taking stairs 2 at a time despite the sharp complaints from her knees. The fluorescent lights in the stairwell flickered, casting strobing shadows that made her head swim. She could hear footsteps above her, Chen and the officer following, but she had a lead, and her fury drove her forward with the momentum of a freight train. No more hiding. No more being the victim watched through telephoto lenses. B2 smelled like exhaust fumes and stale oil, the familiar scent of the parking garage where she'd walked to her car hundreds of times, unaware of the eyes tracking her movements. The stairwell door opened with a pneumatic hiss, and Brenda emerged into the dim concrete expanse dotted with parked vehicles. Her eyes scanned the shadows between the support columns, searching. A car engine rumbled somewhere to her left, echoing off the low ceiling. She moved toward the sound, her breath coming in controlled bursts now, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Then she saw him. Julian Mercer stood beside a Navy sedan near the exit ramp, his body angled toward the driver's door, but his head turned back toward the building. Even from 30 feet away, Brenda could see his expression, that same mild, pleasant smile he'd worn during every mundane interaction they'd had over the past year. The smile of a man who organized supply orders and fixed printer jams and said good morning in the break room. The smile of a man who had thousands of photographs of her stored on hard drives. He saw her. The smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes, a predatory calculation that made her skin crawl even from this distance. He straightened slowly, pulling his hand from his jacket pocket. Metal glinted in the garage's harsh lighting. A knife with a fixed blade, the kind hunters used for field dressing game. Brenda's forward momentum faltered for half a second, her survival instinct screaming at her to retreat, to wait for the police, to let trained professionals handle this. But her rage was a living thing now, fed by a year of violation, of having her privacy stripped away, photograph by photograph, of living in her own home while knowing those eyes had been there too. She grabbed a steering wheel lock from the hood of a nearby car where someone had carelessly left it. The metal was cold and solid in her hands, heavy enough to hurt. She advanced, her shoes scuffing against the oil-stained concrete. Julian moved toward her, no longer smiling. His face had transformed into something else entirely. Focused, intent, stripped of all social pretense. This was the real him, the one who had been hiding behind unremarkable features and forgettable conversations. The knife blade caught the light as he adjusted his grip. They closed the distance between them, two figures in a concrete tomb, circling like animals. Brenda's pulse hammered in her throat, but her hands remained steady on the steering wheel lock. She'd raised 3 children, buried a husband, survived corporate restructurings and budget cuts, and every other challenge life had thrown at her. She would not be reduced to a collection of stolen images by this predator who wore mild-mannered disguises. He lunged first, faster than she'd anticipated for someone with his slight build. The knife arced toward her midsection in a practiced upward thrust. Brenda twisted, feeling the blade whisper past her ribcage, close enough that she felt the displaced air through her blouse. She brought the steering wheel lock down hard on his extended arm, connecting with his forearm with a solid crack that reverberated through her shoulders. Julian grunted, the first sound she'd heard him make, and the knife clattered to the concrete. But he recovered instantly, ramming his shoulder into her chest and driving her backward. Brenda's spine hit a concrete support column, forcing the air from her lungs in an explosive gasp. Stars burst across her vision. The impact rattled her teeth, but Brenda twisted sideways before Julian could pin her against the column. Her shoulder scraped concrete, tearing fabric and skin, but she stayed mobile. That was survival. Keep moving, never let them trap you. She swung the steering wheel lock in a wide arc, forcing him to retreat 3 steps. The metal cylinder hummed through empty air. Julian's face remained eerily calm despite the awkward angle of his injured arm. He circled left, limping slightly now, searching for an opening. Brenda tracked his movement, her back no longer against anything solid. The parking garage stretched around them, empty cars bearing silent witness to their dance of violence. Her breath came in sharp pulls that burned her throat. She spotted the knife on the ground, 8 feet away, the blade reflecting fluorescent lights overhead. Julian saw her glance and moved to intercept, but Brenda feinted right then dove left, her knee protesting the sudden movement with a hot spike of pain. Her fingers closed around the knife handle just as his shoe connected with her ribs. The kick lifted her partially off the ground, sending her rolling across oil-stained concrete that scraped her cheek raw. Brenda came up with the knife in her left hand, the steering wheel lock somehow still gripped in her right. Blood filled her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. Julian stood 5 feet away, breathing harder now, cradling his damaged arm. The basement air tasted like gasoline and old exhaust, thick enough to coat her lungs. "This ends now," she said through split lips. Julian smiled again. That same unsettling expression from the photos, from the elevator, from a year of calculated proximity. He pulled a second knife from his back pocket, smaller, but just as lethal. The blade snicked open with a sound like breaking bones. He'd been prepared for everything, planned for every contingency, except for her refusal to become his victim. They rushed together simultaneously, 2 bodies driven by opposing needs, his to possess, hers to survive. Brenda blocked his knife thrust with the steering wheel lock. metal screeching against metal in a shower of sparks. She drove her own blade toward his midsection, feeling resistance as it punctured fabric and found flesh. Julian twisted, preventing deep penetration, and hammered his elbow into her temple. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together in a nauseous swirl. Brenda staggered but kept her feet, muscle memory from decades of movement sustaining her, when conscious thought faltered. She felt wetness on her face, blood or sweat, impossible to tell. Julian pressed his advantage, raining blows with his good arm while his knife hand sought her throat. Brenda dropped low, years of yoga classes making her more flexible than he'd anticipated. She swept his legs with the steering wheel lock, connecting hard with his knees. Julian toppled backward, arms windmilling for balance he couldn't find. His head struck the concrete bumper of a parked sedan with a hollow thunk that echoed through the garage. He lay still, chest rising and falling in shallow movements, eyes unfocused and staring at nothing. Blood pooled beneath his skull, spreading slowly across the oil-stained floor like spilled ink. Brenda stood over him, both weapons ready, watching for any sign of renewed threat. Her entire body trembled with adrenaline and exertion, muscles screaming their protest at 63 years being pushed beyond reasonable limits. Julian's eyes found her face, clarity returning for a moment. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Then something in his expression simply stopped, like a light switching off behind his eyes. His breathing continued, ragged and wet, but the intelligence that had orchestrated a year of calculated stalking had departed. Brenda dropped both weapons, her fingers refusing to release them until she consciously forced each digit to open. Her phone lay where she'd dropped it earlier, screen cracked but still functional. She pressed emergency services with shaking fingers that left bloody smears on the glass. "Parking garage, sublevel 2, she whispered when the operator answered. Her voice sounded strange, distant, as if coming from someone else's throat. "Send police and ambulance. There's been an incident." The operator's questions faded into background noise as Brenda slid down the concrete column until she sat on cold pavement. Her ribs screamed, her face throbbed, her shoulder felt like someone had set it on fire. But she was alive, conscious, and the man who had stolen a year of her peace lay unconscious 6 feet away. The parking garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent, illuminating the scene of her survival. Block 1010. 6 months later, Brenda stepped through the revolving doors of the new building, her heels clicking against polished marble that still smelled faintly of installation sealant. Morning sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting geometric patterns across walls that bore no memories of Julian. The company had relocated 3 months after the incident, corporate leadership making decisions that aligned perfectly with her unspoken needs. She carried her leather briefcase in her left hand, the shoulder that had been wrenched during the garage confrontation now strong enough for yoga twice weekly. Her physical therapist had called her recovery remarkable for someone her age. Brenda had simply smiled, knowing that survival required more than age considerations. The new security desk gleamed with updated technology, badge scanners that actually worked, cameras positioned at every entrance and exit, a guard who made eye contact with each arriving employee, not buried in his phone. Brenda touched her ID to the scanner, hearing the satisfying beep of approval. "Morning, Miss Hughes," the guard said, his weathered face crinkling with genuine warmth. "Morning, Thomas." The elevator carried her upward in smooth silence, so different from the grinding machinery of the old building. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed subtle changes. Haircut shorter for easy maintenance, posture straighter despite the ordeal, eyes that held knowledge she wished she could unknow. The purple bruises had faded months ago. The internal ones took longer. Her new office occupied a corner position on the 7th floor, windows facing east and south. No blind spots. No shadows where someone could stand watching without being seen. She'd requested the location specifically, and human resources had accommodated without question. The company's legal team had made certain settlements, signed particular documents, ensured her comfort in ways that acknowledged responsibility without admitting fault. Brenda set her briefcase on the glass desk, noting the small potted orchid blooming in delicate white petals. Her daughter had sent it last week from Atlanta, along with a card reminding her that beautiful things could still grow in formerly dark spaces. The sentiment was almost too on the nose, but Brenda watered it faithfully each morning. Her computer booted up, displaying a clean desktop with organized folders. She'd implemented new protocols across the department, background checks extending deeper, reference verification becoming mandatory, probationary periods lengthening from 3 months to 6. Changes that protected not just her, but everyone who walked these halls believing their workplace was safe. Movement in the doorway made her glance up. A woman in her early 40s stood there, holding 2 coffee cups from the cafe downstairs. Patricia, the new hire who'd joined the team 8 weeks ago. Her background check had been thorough enough to include parking tickets from college. "Thought you might need this," Patricia said, setting 1 cup on Brenda's desk before backing away respectfully. "Thank you." Patricia retreated, understanding without needing explanation that Brenda preferred distance until trust was earned. The coffee was perfect. 2 sugars, no cream, exactly as Brenda prepared it herself. She sipped slowly, tasting normalcy in the familiar bitterness. Through her window, the city stretched outward in morning light. Somewhere in a maximum security psychiatric facility, Julian existed in whatever consciousness the state deemed manageable through medication and supervision. The trial had been mercifully brief. His attorney had pleaded diminished capacity. The prosecutor had presented the journal, the photographs, the year-long documentation of escalating obsession. The judge had ordered indefinite commitment with annual reviews. Brenda rarely thought about those details anymore. She'd attended the hearing, testified with clinical precision, then walked away from that chapter. Her therapist called it compartmentalization. Brenda called it survival. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Philadelphia, suggesting a weekend visit. Brenda typed a response confirming dates, already imagining the comfort of her sister's guest room, the noise of her nephews playing basketball in the driveway, the normalcy of family dinners where workplace horror stories remained unspoken. The morning progressed through meetings and emails, quarterly reports, and budget reviews. Brenda moved through her responsibilities with practiced competence, her reputation intact despite the whispers that had circulated after the incident. If anything, colleagues treated her with increased respect, as if surviving attempted violence had proved something about her character that decades of excellent work never had. At lunch, she walked 3 blocks to a small Vietnamese restaurant, refusing to let fear trap her indoors. The owner recognized her now, nodding as she entered. Brenda ordered pho, extra lime, and sat by the window watching pedestrians navigate sidewalks with the confidence of people whose biggest concern was making the next light. Her phone showed a notification from her self-defense instructor. Class tomorrow evening at 6. She'd been training consistently since leaving physical therapy, learning techniques that her 63-year-old body could execute effectively. The instructor never asked why she'd started. Brenda appreciated that discretion. Returning to the office, she found a package on her desk. Her name written in careful calligraphy on expensive stationery. Her heart rate spiked before logic engaged. The package had passed through security, been screened, been delivered by reception. She opened it carefully anyway. Inside, a leather-bound planner for the new fiscal year from her mentor across town. A woman who'd built her career through Silicon Valley's earliest days, when being female and black meant fighting battles on multiple fronts. The attached note read simply, "You're stronger than you know." Brenda placed the planner beside her computer, running her fingers over the embossed initials. BH. Brenda Hughes. Still here, still standing, still claiming space in rooms that had tried to make her small. The afternoon sun shifted angles, warming her office with golden light that held no shadows. She worked steadily through project timelines, her focus sharp, her hands steady. When 6 o'clock arrived, she packed her briefcase with the same efficient movements she'd performed for decades, added her gym bag containing workout clothes and pepper spray, and headed toward the elevators. The parking garage of the new building was above ground, brightly lit, with security patrols every 30 minutes. Brenda still parked near the entrance, still checked her surroundings, still kept her keys positioned for defense. But the panic that had characterized her first weeks post-incident had diminished to manageable caution. She drove home through evening traffic, radio playing old Motown that required no emotional processing. Her apartment waited on the 4th floor of a building with controlled access and a doorman who knew her by sight. She'd moved 2 months after the incident, creating fresh space untainted by the knowledge that Julian had known her address. Inside, she kicked off her heels and poured a glass of Merlot, carrying it to the balcony where potted herbs grew in careful rows. The city spread below in gathering darkness, lights beginning to sparkle as day transitioned to night. Brenda sipped her wine slowly, feeling the tension of maintained vigilance ease from her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would do this again, and the day after. Building days into weeks, into months, into a life that had survived its attempted destruction. The scars remained, visible and otherwise. But so did she. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.